I'm here to introduce our key speakers for today. Jim Breyer is the founder and CEO of Breyer Capital, a premier venture capital firm based in Austin, Texas, and Menlo Park, California. Jim has been an early investor in over 40 technology companies that have completed highly successful public offerings or mergers. Michael Dell is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Dell Technologies, one of the world's largest IT companies. In 1998, Michael formed MSD Capital, a private investment firm that manages the capital for the Dell family. And in 1999, he and his wife Susan Dell established the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation to accelerate opportunity for children growing up in urban poverty in the US, in India, and in South Africa. Be sure to engage with us with your questions on the app, and please welcome them to the stage.
Well, this is fun. Thank you. It's great to see so many familiar faces in the audience, and I know there are a lot on video. And Michael, what a pleasure.
Great to be with you, Jim, and great to see a great audience today.
Terrific. Well, I thought we would start with Austin, Texas, and then we'll move to a number of ranging topics from AI, medicine, the Dell journey, advice to the 25-year-old self that you would provide today. And for those of you who have not read the book, and I would imagine there are very few, I thought it was simply exceptional, having known Michael for 15 plus years. The journey, the courage, the advice to young entrepreneurs, I think, is really exceptional. So we'll get to that as well. But let's start with Austin, Texas. You came here as a student. You ran a business that became quite large, 100 billion in revenue. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Out of your dorm room to start. Tell us about the Austin journey and your thoughts about where we are today in Austin and where you think we're going.
Well, Austin had a couple of 100,000 people when I first showed up here as a freshman in 1983. I think we're up to 2.2 million or something like that now. There was actually a period where the city discouraged growth, and I think that there was a lot of sort of pent-up demand for Austin to grow. And so, what causes a place to grow, right? Or what causes a city like Austin to be created? Well, I think, first of all, you need a great university or several great universities. And I believe there's something like 400,000 students within a 100-mile radius of where we are right now, which is kind of amazing, right? And young people have to want to live there. Right. That seems to me to be the magic combination. And Austin's been great. I think it's going to keep growing. It's been roughly doubling in size every decade. And what's also really interesting is if you look at all these towns around the periphery, I was in Buda, Texas yesterday, but if you think about, Kyle and Pflugerville and all these towns, go look, they're all growing at double-digit rates compounded each year. So, and obviously you get a bit of a hub effect, network effects in terms of tech companies, and there were tech companies in Austin way before, I showed up, right? It was IBM in the 60s, and AMD and Motorola. And of course now you have a blossoming ecosystem of new companies that you're funding, and you've got all the elements that I think will continue to make Austin's future very bright.
What are your concerns regarding the next 10 years in Austin? Obviously, there are challenges. There are significant challenges in some of our great cities, San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles. How do you see the challenges in Austin over the next 10 years?
Well, I think homelessness, affordable housing, those two kind of go together. Transportation, those are probably the top of mind ones. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Community First Village.
Absolutely.
This is really an amazing place. My wife and I were just there a few days ago, checking out the progress, and I think those are the top of mind issues. Affordable housing. I mean, real estate has gone bananas. That makes it very hard for many people to be able to live in the area. Of course, oil prices are going up, right? Good time to have an electric car, I guess. But what do you see, Jim? You've been here a couple of years now, but you had been coming here quite a lot, when you were on the Dell board and for other activities. How have you seen the city evolve? What do you see as the challenges?
Well, I'll start with what you described as the reason great talent continues to come to Austin. A great university, which is on the rise in many ways and sits at the heart of so much of what is important from a venture capital standpoint, which is interdisciplinary investing. So this idea, and we'll get into it, of computation and medicine, computation in the life sciences, what quantum technologies, the great physicists here and chemists and biologists, what they're going to be able to do with these radically improved computation rates. Austin, in many ways, sits at a hub where that kind of interdisciplinary thinking can occur. I love art. I'm fortunate to be a trustee at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and SF MoMA. The burgeoning art scene in Austin is incredible. And we all know about the music scene. And we're hopefully post-COVID now, so all of that starts to come back. The other piece that doesn't get reported enough, I think, on the two coasts is the integration of Austin with what's excellent in Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, these city hubs. We have a wonderful Dell Alumni Association, by the way, and Ross Perot and Tom Luce are two great friends, and what they talk about is the importance of the Dallas hospitals. Obviously in Houston, we have one of the great cancer centers in the world, MD Anderson, and the opportunity to integrate that into what is special about Austin and a certain startup medical school, Dell Medical School, is really exciting. So for all those reasons, I'm very optimistic long term. There is so much talent here in and around Austin. There's a lot of talent coming, as we know, from today, just in the couple discussions informally we had, the people from Los Angeles and the Bay Area, New York and elsewhere, Chicago, is really astounding. And so it's a really exciting time. And Breyer Capital's made now over 20 investments in Austin. I expect that to fully double over the next 2 years in many of the areas that we discussed. So it's a super exciting time to be here. And I'm also thankful because one other characteristic of Austin that we should never forget about, and you emphasize it in your book, and it's part of the Dell culture, you can play nice and win. And so in many parts of Silicon Valley and Seattle and Boston, it's a winner-take-all view. And there's tremendous innovation, and that will continue. But in Austin, companies cooperate, entrepreneurs are seed investing other entrepreneurs. There's a mutual win-win culture that today is very unique, in my view, based on world opportunities around innovation, entrepreneurship, venture capital. And I think that's going to serve the community and the state well as we think about the next decade.
Yeah, and it's, kind of watching the entrepreneurial community here, it's amazing how much it has kind of taken off and accelerated over the last, 5 to 10 years, but I would say particularly the last maybe 3 to 4 years, with the whole ecosystem of support, world-renowned venture capitalists like yourself, moving to Austin, make a big difference in that. There's kind of this network effect and ecosystem effect that takes hold, and it's exciting to see.
It is, and the other piece of it, I see many familiar faces in the audience, Bob Metcalf, Josh Baer, others. The seed investing that is occurring in Austin, and we all know it takes 4 or 5 years to really recognize how fundamental seed investing might become, is extraordinary. And so that is something that I think, again, is very exciting, because there's this force we hear in the Bay Area about the PayPal mafia. Well, let me tell you, the Dell alumni mafia is second to none. And they also provide incredible mentorship to a lot of the entrepreneurs. So that's another characteristic of the Dell culture, which I think you should be very, very proud of.
Thank you.
Michael, let's talk a little bit about your advice to entrepreneurs, the 25-year-olds, and if you had a chance to reflect and write that letter to your 25-year-old self. You have a really terrific son, Zach, who's in the venture capital business. You should be very proud, and I'm proud. They're 2 sons, Ted Breyer and Daniel Breyer, who are in the audience, who are exceptional and doing great work in consumer investing and crypto and a number of other fields. What's your advice to the 25-year-old entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, as you think about what you've learned and how you think about capitalizing and doing good in many ways over the next decade or 2?
Well, I kind of start with, asking Zach to explain this whole crypto thing to me, which I know we're going to get to, and I want to hear you talk about that. But I wish I was more patient. I wish I had done more planning. I wish I had thought about how we, would grow and evolve our team over time. I wish I was a better listener. It's kind of things you learn by making mistakes and with time and age. But
we were once young Turks. Michael's still a young Turk, but it's remarkable as we've reflected over many years on the journey.
Yeah, I wasn't very patient. I think we've both seen a lot of people that have started businesses, and some of them have been very successful. Right? Not all of them. I think they're definitely not all the same. Each one of them is a little different in their own characteristics. Kind of what's worked for me is the curiosity, learning, listening, embracing risk, trying to stay pretty humble, and thinking about problems from a new perspective, and thinking about how we can actually do something that is super important and super valuable for our customers and for the people we're serving.
Are there certain industries or fields, when you're thinking about the next 10 or 20 years, for entrepreneurs in the audience, venture capitalists? I go back to The Graduate, one of my favorite movies of all time, and there are pithy quotes about what the next decade of opportunities might look like, and we've all experienced that. There are trends that are only trendy, but then there are some very fundamental trends. Are there areas where, from your point of view and what you see, both through philanthropy as well as through Dell, that you think over the next decade or two are the areas with the most significant upside in terms of both positive change and creation of shareholder value?
Well, what's interesting about technology is it's kind of been built in layers, right? And if you went back and you said, okay, it's the 1970s, what is technology, right? We're sort of at the beginning of semiconductors, right? and what could you do with the semiconductors? Well, you could do a few things, but it wasn't obviously like it is now. And then you sort of went into this age where you could build microprocessors, and you had systems, and people were building things to store data. People were creating databases, right? And then you started to create more programming languages and more applications. And now what you see are new companies that are not doing really those things, right? They're applying all these layers of incredible technology across every industry and sector of society and the world you could imagine. And so I think the opportunity for pretty much everything in the world to be upended by AI is quite significant. Certainly, and by the way, I say that in a positive context. We both believe that the vast majority of this is going to be done in a positive context, though some people could do bad things with any tool. So I think healthcare, you've invested quite a bit in AI in healthcare. Education feels like there's starting to be some breakthroughs in technology, or the application of technology in education. And those are two areas that I think are ripe for innovation. I think the next 10 years, as we've talked about in healthcare, I think are going to be a decade of tremendous progress. But I think every field is, if you're an existing company, you have to reimagine yourself in the context of all these super powerful technologies that are showing up and rapidly, transform. And if you're, trying to get in those businesses, well, you have the attacker's advantage, right? You can sort of say, hey, we don't have a legacy, we don't have all this stuff. What does the new thing look like? And you go create Stripe, right? Or other amazing companies, because you've got a clean slate. And of course the new companies are increasingly in these vertical areas, and where it's a specific domain, and they're not about okay, well, we figured out how to have bigger disk drives or something.
Absolutely.
I mean, those infrastructure layers are still important. You have to build things on something, right? But the amount of innovation, and if you look at sort of the roster of all the new companies, well, they're in all these new vertical areas. That's kind of how, tell us about what you're funding at Breyer Capital. What kind of interesting companies are you seeing?
Well, you know a number of them because we co-invest with Dell often, as well as your good friend Mark Benioff at Salesforce. And I think there are a couple of high-level themes. First of all, again, where computation intersects medicine and healthcare. When I'm speaking to students at Harvard and Stanford and UT and other great universities, this is an area where I think we're literally not even on the first hole for those golfers in the audience. I was speaking to the outgoing CEO of Memorial Sloan Kettering, and today at MSK, about 5% of the professionals are in computation. And he thinks a decade from now, that number's 35 to 40%. And many of our top hospitals and medical schools see that happening as well. I was very fortunate to be on the Harvard's senior governing board, when we were recruiting for our dean of the medical school, who turned out to be George Daly, who's spectacular. I probably was part of interviewing 25 to 30 candidates. Literally 1% or 2% would talk about computation, and this was 6 years ago. Today, with faculty recruitment, deans of potentially Dell Medical School and others, if you don't have a full understanding of how to bring computation in and break down the silos, which we talk often about, you're just not going to be a great medical institution, or a university, for that matter, a decade or two from now. And so many of the investment themes are where artificial intelligence and the beginnings now of quantum sensing and technologies impact drug discovery. It's remarkable what is happening around drug discovery, molecular simulation, and I can't even imagine how to do drug discovery 2 or 3 years from now without these incredible tools that are out there.
Yeah, well, this is kind of the scientific method, you know, on a scale that nobody has ever imagined. And, you know, you sort of start with the data, right? And it turns out the amount of growth in data is tremendous, right? You've probably heard these stats, like the amount of data in the world, you know, is doubling every 8 months, then it's 7 months, then it's, you know, 6 months. It just goes faster and faster. So nobody really wants data. What they want are improved outcomes, right? and results, and, you know, better health outcomes, and outcomes in all endeavors of life. And so, and of course, if you think about what's happening, right, it used to be, you know, a computer was like $1 gazillion. You had to have a special white coat to go there. Now computers are $1 or a penny. You know, there's intelligence in everything, and then you get these new networks like 5G and the coming 6G, where everything in the physical world is now intelligent. They're all talking to each other. You have all this data. Humans can't make sense of all that. No chance. It has to be AI, machine learning. And again, this opportunity to kind of reimagine all aspects of everything that goes on in the world is tremendous. It doesn't happen automatically, by the way. It's not like you can just put the stuff together and out comes the answer. But you know, I think it's a super exciting time. There's never been a better time to be alive, even with some of the horrific crises that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. What I would also add for entrepreneurs in particular, this intersection we touched on between universities and startups. There's always been some extraordinary opportunity that has emanated from many universities. There obviously are the famous stories of Larry and Sergey leaving and starting Google with their computer science professor. But I've never seen this many opportunities, again, in some of these areas like crypto, AI, and medicine, where there is extraordinary talent, 22, 25, 27-year-olds, and faculty that have to come together if the companies are going to succeed.
Let's talk about crypto, because you started investing in crypto when?
In 2013.
Okay, and you know, something you mentioned, there has been this kind of enormous influx of remarkably talented people into this field. Tell us, what did you see, and what have you been doing, and sort of, you know, where do you think all this goes? these are the questions I ask my son. Trying
I'd like to have
trying to
Zach
figure
and
this
Ted
out.
and Daniel up here as we brainstorm. But in 2013, a phenomenal entrepreneur I'd backed twice, and this is a continuing theme in the venture business, backing entrepreneurs 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Jeremy Allaire really had the insight that blockchain and Bitcoin were going to be fundamental long term. And he had a phenomenal partner. And so in May of 2013, I wrote a Series A check into Circle. Circle today is best known for its US dollar coin. And there's tremendous growth there. And not only that, but in this crazy world of international conflict, I think a lot of people are thinking through how do we make sure that the US dollar remains highly relevant in this world of crypto. And you can only have to look as far as US dollar coin growth and what's happening that makes it far less full of friction in terms of payments, creators trying to get micropayments in terms of whether it's film, journalism, images. And in 2013, with my partners, I was very lucky as well to invest in the Series A of Coinbase, which is now a large public company. So we've done about 20 crypto investments since 2013, largely around blockchain infrastructure. So rarely will we make a big bet on a certain coin. But we will make big bets on what I would consider to be the genius 25 to 30-year-olds who are at Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. And when I meet with them, they're looking for a couple things. They're looking for an ability to impact the world. They're looking for massive opportunity because they've been in some of these companies that have achieved great scale, and mission-driven. And so when I ask them what they're going to do next, because we have a pipeline of Breyer Capital of about 100 of these individuals, they'll say crypto, they'll say AI and medicine, and they'll talk about sustainability. Mm-hmm. So if you ask me, sometimes venture capital can be very simple. Follow the absolute best and brightest. And the best and brightest today are moving into crypto, AI, and sustainability. And that is central to the Breyer Capital investment thesis. We want to be able to call, if it's AI medicine, a Nobel laureate or a potential Nobel laureate at Harvard or Stanford or UT, who are the 3 or 4 best postdocs in your program. Mm-hmm. And that's how we intersect a lot of these opportunities. I would also say, though, that we're in a real-time reset in terms of, we know, globalization. You know this far more than I. And so the challenges around global supply chain, the challenges around an increasingly fractious world as we speak, does lead to, I think, far more complex strategies that need to be implemented. It's no longer thinking through how do we get to Europe in 6 months or 12 months. I think I'm starting to see an emphasis in Austin and Silicon Valley, Boston, New York, the best entrepreneurs thinking, for now, we want to create a social good, but at the same time, we're focused on the US for the foreseeable future, given global risks. And I'd be interested in what you see, particularly around global supply chain. There's no one I've ever met more insightful than Michael when it comes to supply chain. I think there are a lot of people in the audience and on video who would love to hear what you're seeing real time relative to supply chain.
Well, the tension actually goes back to about 2016 when there was a certain candidate, we won't get into that, but who there was a lot of increased discussion about tariffs, and that sort of was a signal to us that all right, we need to be thinking about our global supply chain a bit differently. Then you had obviously COVID, and now you've got what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. All that is to say that supply chain, the movement has been from just in time to just in case, and to be more resilient. And the other thing that happened during COVID was the only thing that worked was technology. And so technology was already on this upward slope, as the optimists, would look at it.
We're both optimists,
and
so
say,
we're not going to be balanced in terms
there's
of
going to
the
be more
pessimistic
technology.
view.
Everybody knows that. Well, now it's going up even faster. And so what do you need? You need semiconductors. Well, just go make some more, right? It takes about 3 years to build a new semiconductor plant, and $10 billion, by the way. And then it takes about a year for the plant to actually be producing at yield. So it's not like you could just stand these things up right away. It's an unbelievably complicated series of processes to build these things, and the capital. And so good news is investments going in, but the demand keeps going up, you've right now, for example, you've also got disruption in a lot of the rare earth metals, certainly commodity inflation across many areas, and freight, has been seriously impacted because of the COVID issues and other logistical challenges. A lot of freight moves from Asia, specifically China, to Europe by rail.
Through Moscow.
Yeah, go look on a map where the rail goes. You probably don't want your trains going through there right now. So that means you put them on a boat, takes more time. Supply chains need to be much more resilient, and also the product design creation process has to be much more flexible so that you can take in multiple sources of supply and continue to meet the demand. It's a demand shock, but it's also a supply shock. So both of them together.
And what does that mean from where you sit relative to inflation? Neither of us is an economist, but certainly through my discussions with Doug McMillan at Walmart and a number of others, we're seeing potential significant inflation that's persistent. But I'd be curious to hear what you're seeing relative to inflation. I know there are a lot of countervailing trends.
Yeah, I mean, I was always kind of skeptical of inflation because technology is very deflationary, and it continues to be. But when you look at the input costs, certainly there's tremendous inflation, and it doesn't appear like it's going to be going away. And then you get into government stimulus and all that, which obviously drives some measure of inflation. While that's changing a bit, doesn't seem to be slowing down too much. So I think the inflation is going to be with us for quite some time.
I see it the same way. And it's remarkable, and I think, again, when we're trying to advise partners, entrepreneurs, high-stage growth companies, and 3 of them in Austin, Everly Health and Zen Business, and soon to be a couple others, are now well over $1 billion market cap. But now these inflationary pressures and the challenging times, I think, are going to reset growth. For instance, in many cases, we're adjusting down for the portfolio companies in these really interesting technology areas. We're adjusting down the European growth by at least half this year.
Well, and you know, the European economy is likely to be much more impacted by the
You bet.
horrible situation in Ukraine right now. Certainly, you know, gas, energy costs, but also agriculture, and you know, the opportunity for that to spiral into other problems, unfortunately, is pretty high. So, you know, we tend to focus on what things can we control and what can we actually do something about. We can't do a lot about all those things other than to try to manage around them.
You bet. Although for the startups in the audience and the seed entrepreneurs and those with growth stage, as many of the portfolio companies of Breyer Capital here, dialing back cash burn rate right now makes a lot of sense. If I have to take a macro view, that's going to be one of the significant challenges, because part of, as you know, Michael, being a great entrepreneur is optimism, courage, changing the world. It doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with we have to keep costs under significant control to live another day, or more importantly, to invest and prioritize in what really matters.
Yeah, you've got to have a healthy dose of realism and make adjustments along the way. And this is definitely one of those times where, you know, the world's adjusting.
So one of the most exciting things that I've seen coming back to Austin, we see it in other geographies to some extent, would be these innovation zones. And what I tell my very good friends in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the life sciences, of course, in Cambridge are exceptional, but MIT and Harvard didn't directly participate in the real estate and the wet labs to the extent that was possible. There's an exciting build out in Allston, Massachusetts, where Harvard is very active. In Austin right now, there is tremendous discussion and a tremendous opportunity around a number of different innovation zones. As Michael Dell, an advisor to what might be a Dell Medical Innovation Zone here in Austin, what advice would you give our real estate developers, our university, our entrepreneurs, as they think about co-locating or locating around a Dell Medical Innovation Zone? And do you fundamentally believe it's a huge opportunity, or do you believe entrepreneurs are better served by, again, small offices off the beaten path, or dorm rooms for that instance?
Well, yeah, you got to have the dorm room. You know, look, I think the opportunity, as you talked about, for a multidisciplinary multidisciplinary innovations with research universities and, you know, health related startups, medical schools, and again, you get these network effects where you attract the best researchers and you know, teams that want to be involved in that work. I think there's a real opportunity for there to be a hub here of great innovation in healthcare. And of course, it does extend you know, to the broader UT system and Texas. You get MD Anderson in Houston doing, you know, incredible work in cancer. And you know, I think cancer is actually an area where I think the next 10 years there's going to be tremendous breakthroughs, and a lot of that will be driven by computational power and you know, the intersection of the computational sciences and the, you know, life sciences, and so that feels like a great area for a hub for new spin-offs, for new, you know, companies, you know, to be created.
Well, we agree. So at Breyer Capital, we're either opening an office or presences in some of these innovation zones, including Austin. I mentioned Cambridge for life sciences. Silicon Valley will never go away. I'm often asked, what's the difference between Silicon Valley and Austin? I could go on. But for deep breakthrough technologies, advanced AI, shortly Breyer Capital will be announcing a quantum sensing and quantum technology spin out from a major technology company. Silicon Valley is unparalleled for the deep technologies. But what I love about Austin, doing something really on an interdisciplinary basis, I think will lead to real breakthroughs, because there's just by nature more of an interdisciplinary feel in Austin today. And I mentioned it, one of the reasons I came to Austin, and you were so instrumental, not only the entrepreneurial and venture capital opportunities, but again, think of South by Southwest celebrating 3 decades, art, film, music. It's not enough to have a great technology hub. It's not enough to have great technologists to get the best and brightest and the right set of interests. And what makes, I think, all of us really excited is you need the artists, the musicians, the entrepreneurial food executives, the restaurants, and it is really exciting here in Austin relative to that.
Yeah, and I think another thing that we saw with COVID was a more distributed future, right? Which we were probably headed toward anyway in some way. But I think you're seeing, talent being able to be engaged in a remote and hybrid way, right? And I think that probably continues at some level. People love the flexibility, and while it's great to live in a wonderful city, like Austin, well, there's lots of talent all over the world, and so I think organizations are figuring out how to create that hybrid engagement model so that a broader, more diverse universe of talent is able to be accessed. So you don't actually have to physically live in a certain place to have. There are some jobs where that's required, right? But not all jobs.
No, I agree. And one thing we've lost in the last 2 years, we've talked about it. One of my public boards is Blackstone. We have an exceptional set of leaders, of course, Steve Schwartzman and John Gray, our president. And what we reflect upon is, for the incoming analysts, associates, there isn't the sense of culture that existed pre-COVID. And so it's up to leadership teams now to really instill the cultural values of the institution. And some of that is much easier in person. On the other end of the spectrum, though, I'm not a believer that we're going 5 days a week back into the office. It just is not what the most talented individuals necessarily want to do. So we are in a world, you know it, I see it in the startups, we're in a hybrid world forever, and that's a good thing.
Agreed.
Well, I'm going to think about some questions here from the audience, but one is from Scott Henderson, and the question is, knowing how many millionaires Dell created, how do you think about what are the next steps that would make a lot of sense for today's founders to take to make sure that they're creating wealth for the core team? I would add, though, in addition to that, so many of the Dell alumni also are remarkable philanthropists. And so again, how do you take steps to ensure there's wealth for the core team, but that wealth will also be invested in social impact and nonprofit enterprises as well?
Yeah, well, you kind of start with the things that you're responsible for. So, if you've got a company, create a culture of giving back, right? And there's lots of ways you can do that. It doesn't have to be just money, right? It could be volunteering time and involvement in the community. You can have matching programs, and people learn by what they see, right? And so you can create that culture. And I think a lot of new companies have succeeded because they've created this culture of ownership, and they've given people a stake in the action, right? And they've got a fairly big incentive, for the new venture to succeed. And let's face it, not all these ventures succeed. There's risk involved, but yeah, I think the way that extends beyond the core team is you have ownership beyond the core team, and as broadly as you can reasonably do.
It is fascinating to me still, in a number of cases where I'm speaking with other investors, they will mention, well, we think only the top 10% of senior management should be getting stock options or stock. And one thing I've learned, 100% of the team should have equity compensation tied to the success of the company. Simple as that. And the other piece I've learned has to be long-term compensation. You know that as well as anyone. It's remarkable how the compounding effect works, and if one takes a 5 to 10 year retention strategy, and we want our employees and stakeholders to do well, there has to be that view that this is a 7 to 10 year ride at least.
Yeah, and sometimes you're kind of forcing them to think long term, right? Because of the nature of the incentives. But if it works well, then they'll thank you for it.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to touch on, because I know there are a number of questions that have come to me prior to this discussion. Web 3.0, the Metaverse, huge theme for many of you in the audience here at South by. And do you feel from where you sit that the Metaverse and Web 3.0 is overhyped? Or do you think there's something fundamental happening given your pattern recognition, and you would encourage a lot of our Metaverse entrepreneurs, seed investors in the audience to be thinking, again, long-term, and that it's very fundamental?
Yeah, Web3 I don't think is overhyped. Certainly there could be some instances right, of overhyping, but I think the distributed future is real, and that has enormous amounts of promise. Metaverse has many different definitions. If it's the VR headset, kind of the first day you get it, that's pretty cool. Second day, then it goes in the drawer, right? After a while.
Unless there's a very compelling game or mutual experience.
Yeah.
There are some on Oculus and others where they are very compelling.
How many persistent VR users do we have out there in the audience? Okay, couple. 5, including Jim. Maybe it was 4. I don't know, but yeah. So look, I think the potential is enormous, and as you get more computational power and better graphics, as it becomes photorealistic, you won't be able to distinguish it from reality, and actually things in VR and AR will be as interesting and valuable to you as real things, okay? Now, I, for one, don't want to walk around all day long with a headset on. I like to go outside, enjoy nature. So I don't exactly know what that future looks like. And I think for training applications, the application of AR is we've already seen that in a B2B setting, but yeah, Web3 is super interesting, and I think we're going to be in for a much more decentralized future in kind of many domains.
I think that's right. And again, coming back to crypto, DeFi, some of the themes that we're investing in and seeing at Breyer Capital, again, we're just at the beginning. I couldn't agree more. The world, I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic, and we're investing aggressively in this theme that in areas like finance, it will be a much more decentralized world.
And beyond finance, Jim, where do you see crypto and Web3 having, kind of mega impact?
Well, one thing I never got right back in the early days, 99, 2000, of what was then the internet boom, I did feel that internet technologies would enable journalists, creators, musicians to take far more economic interest and get paid through what they're creating. And it didn't happen then. I got very lucky. I made a wonderful investment in 2011 in Daniel Ek and Spotify. But that is a platform, for sure. And I think with DeFi...
You also invested in Etsy.
And I invested in Etsy.
Which was sort of...
Same idea.
In that same theme, yeah.
Well, I have one quick funny story on Etsy now that you remind me, and that is, and it gets to a theme you and I are passionate about, which is empowering women and underrepresented minorities in the world of technology to be leaders and to succeed. So Etsy, as many of you know, in the early days was 90% female buyers, 90% female sellers. And there were investors and board members who said, we have to get more guys. We can't build a big business around that. And so I was at a Microsoft dinner in Seattle in 2010. There was a pretty good e-commerce CEO founder by the name of Jeff Bezos who was seated next to me. And I told him this, and he said, you're absolutely crazy. We would buy Etsy in a heartbeat to have 90% female buyers, sellers. That community is extraordinarily valuable. And so, it didn't take much on the next round of financing. Breyer Capital leaned heavily in at Etsy. So that's one Etsy story. And there are countless examples where Michael has offered a perspective, and again, there are some opinions that really matter. I think with DeFi and the arts and media, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with the head of partnerships at Instagram. And Instagram has built a phenomenal business in the world of galleries and art museums and musicians, we all know, creators. And I think there's an understanding now to win big, whether it's Instagram or whether it's DeFi, we need our filmmakers, we need our producers, we need our journalists to get the ability to get a micropayment for their work. And as I said, I was way too early, way back when, but part of what we're investing in blockchain and Web 3.0 is tools that will allow so many of the great creators to get paid directly and not have to go through 4 or 5 middlemen where that final piece is really low.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk in 10 years again, and we'll see how that has worked out.
Yeah, Web3, kind of enabling that whole creator economy. And, if you think about Substack is one example. I mean, you see a kind of a real revolution going on in how, people that have point of views and opinions and thoughts are, able to reach their audiences.
Yeah. Coming back to then female founders, I see there are a number of questions and people have asked about female leadership. One thing we have not done well by a long shot is recruit and enable female leaders to emerge in the quantities that they should. My mom, who's no longer with us, was a genius mathematician, and I've always been struck with how few female leaders there are in the technology business. And boy, I did a couple things right in Facebook, but certainly one of them was to really actively recruit Cheryl to be the COO in 2008. And we'd get together every 2 weeks, and Cheryl and I have talked about it often. It was a very difficult time in Facebook. And so we'd get together every 2 weeks in Palo Alto, and she'd ask how I'm doing. And I'd say, Cheryl, you tell me how you're doing. If you're doing well, I'm doing well. If you're not doing well, let's figure out what we can do. And there is an emergence here. There's Julia at Everly Health and others that are really knocking it out of the park. What can we do collectively, whether it's our great large companies or venture capitalists, to enable more female entrepreneurs, female leaders, and underrepresented minorities?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot we can do. I mean, one, we can, invite them to our boards that we're on, right? And, there's been some progress there. I think, organizations, can be very explicit about making themselves inclusive workplaces for all, right? And they can go further with setting goals and being very transparent about their progress. We've created these 2030 moonshot goals to have half of our workforce be female and 40% of our people leaders be female. And every year we publish our progress.
Well, a wonderful note to end on. And Michael, again, this is a privilege in many ways for me. I loved the conversation we had on many of these topics at your home here a couple months ago, and I can't wait. There are a number of questions about what is next for Michael Dell, and that is to be discussed at a later time. But thank you, Michael. Thank you all for attending, and really appreciate it.
Thank you.